We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Kelly, great to have you on the show today. How are you?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Um, I suppose a good place to start is what is your background and career for people who are unaware of who you are?
Okay, so I was a very happy married, stay-at-home mother of four. And then in 2015, I found out that we weren't allowed to talk about men who called themselves women, and we weren't allowed to call them men. And I started being censored, kicked out of loads of groups. I was sort of firmly on the left. And then I stumbled into this, and now I'm a global women's rights campaigner.
Wow, so this started purely in 2015?
Yeah. So the Conservatives got elected. I was in lefty groups. I raised an issue when a man who was pretty gross in a group calling himself a woman, and I was set upon. And then once I wasn't allowed to talk about it, that's all I wanted to talk about. And I ended up in secret groups, many of which the members in those very early groups are women who early days had some of the groups. Some of them you might not have heard of. Uh, but yeah, I was sort of an early um, advocate for women's rights in this particular space.
In 2015, what was if you like, temperature's maybe the wrong word. What was the discussions on gender when it comes to gender ideology? Because for a lot of people, they'll only be aware of it maybe in the last couple of years where it's been a bit more prominent, especially with maybe the swimming examples of Lia Thomas and all those kind of examples. What was it like in 2015 for people who are unaware?
Well, we knew we weren't allowed to talk about it. So the group that I was in was called Fair Play for Women and Girls. And we had to sort of be secret, and you had to make sure that members were vetted. And that was like an online Facebook group. So we knew we couldn't talk about it. But back in those early days, men were not really calling themselves women. They were calling themselves trans women. They weren't using words like female. We knew that things like cervix havers, menstruators, and some of the other language was being erased. But and we knew that we had to be careful. So people were beginning to be deleted. Facebook was beginning to sort of kick people off. And there were, I became acutely aware that there were many rules about what you could and couldn't say and who would allow you to say it. So Twitter was off. Um, People were being careful. I was eventually kicked off of Twitter for about 4.5 years in 2018, but it was hotting up, if you like.
What, so again, 2015, people were calling themselves trans women, rather than just women. Was this something that you could see growing frustrations other than just yourself? So was it many people in the group that agreed with you, or was it just yourself in isolation?
Well, I got kicked out the group. Like many groups, I got kicked out. I was asking a question in these groups, which I thought was a very clever gotcha question. And I thought, well, this will break it. This will make everyone see that it's nonsense, which is, does my 11-year-old daughter have the right to be in a female-only space and not see an adult penis? Now,
Yeah.
you would imagine that that would be oh, yeah, well, clearly when we get to that, we could protect your daughter. But that really wasn't the case. She was called transphobic. I was accused, which is the first time I sort of really heard that word. I was accused of being a bigot, that I was raising a pervert for a daughter. So I think for me, the lines were drawn really, really early on that um, that you couldn't talk about that this was an ideology and a cult
Yeah.
because there was no end to where somebody wouldn't serve the cult above and beyond the safety of even little girls. Um, so in the original sort of secret group, there were many women from many different places, but we were sort of very early. We were focused on the Olympic Committee because obviously the Olympics was in 2016, um, and so we were focused on the fact that there might be some men competing as women, and in a funny sort of way, we all hoped that some great big bloke would turn up and compete against women, and the whole world would peak. But no, in those lefty groups, the silencing was really, really effective. The female socialization of wanting to be kind, not being kind, but wanting to be seen to be kind, was fully operational, and many women were very, very compliant.
What was the response? The you said some of the responses, but what was like the rational response when you made that comparison about your daughter and being around, she shouldn't see an adult penis? What was like a lot of these people's response to that?
Well, you use the word rational, and I'd argue that probably there was no rational
All right.
response to it. But they just it's accusation. It's the same. It's the same pattern as everything that doesn't have a defensible position, which is like name calling and deflecting and um, characterizing whatever it is that you say as bigotry. And obviously that's a pattern that we've seen repeat and repeat over the last few years.
Right. I mean, so then the focus was on the Olympics, and obviously that 2016. We've now seen it in particular in sports how that debate is still carrying on, and we've seen some of the awful repercussions. I think for a lot of people who got attention with the trans, I can definitely speak for myself. It was through sport where I first started seeing how big a deal a lot of the trans movement and gender ideology, especially when you saw Elliot Thomas, somebody who was an average swimmer in terms of competing, and then becomes this changes gender and or identifies as something else, and is now uh, was now producing stuff. So when it comes to sport, was he the first big personality, the first big profile, or were there ones before Elliot Thomas?
No, there was a man who competed in the 2016. Did he in the 20? Maybe he was 2020. He certainly wasn't the first. I mean, there was a tennis coach, a tennis player called Rene Richards. I don't know whether he competed at Wimbledon, but he was like 80s. Obviously, you've got Caitlyn Jenner, Bruce Jenner. He was quite, but he wasn't playing sport at the time. But no, I think Leah Thomas maybe was one of the bigger kind of pivotal moments for this debate. And that's, well, if I can be so immodest, that's because I went to Atlanta and I shouted, "He's a man," when he was being interviewed, and really broke the silence. So in that large um, aqua center, I can't remember what the Americans call it, but it's a funny word. It might be totally regular. I just can't remember it. But in the big swimming pool, shall we say, he was competing, and I called him a cheat. And then I shout, "He's a man," and that went quite viral. And there were girls in there that I was talking to, and their parents who were frightened to speak up. Riley Gaines obviously was there as well. Um, and she's very kind, and she sort of says that I helped her see that it was okay to speak out and you wouldn't, break in two. But I also went viral there. There's three viral moments for me. So there was shouting, "He's a man," in a quiet space where everyone knows they've just seen a 6'4" bloke compete against women who he's getting naked in front of and staring at their bodies in that changing room. So everyone knew, nobody spoke. So I spoke. I'm quite good at that. Um, so I broke the silence there. And then outside I talked to a man who's called Don Ennis, who dresses up and calls himself Dawn Ennis, which in an American accent is indecipherable, Dawn and Dawn. And I say to him that he must stay out of women-only spaces. It makes us afraid. So that went quite viral. And then the other one was I was sitting in the watching, and I have a discussion with a woman who takes testosterone and to cut her breast off. And she says, "Are you a biologist?" And I say, "Well, I'm not a vet, but I know what a dog is." So those three that really put the spotlight, that got Tucker Carlson talking to me. So that sort of kind of helped peak the world, I guess.
Yeah.
Or certainly many people that now are fully on board with this.
Well, I think it's amazing the work that you've done in terms of raising awareness. There'll be so many people who A, wouldn't have had the courage to speak out had you not, and secondly, there's people who would not have been aware of how bad this has got to had people like you not spoke up. But that Lia Thomas one is, I think, for we've had people talk about this on this show before about how crazy and absurd that was. You had swimmers who were who felt offended about having him, a 6'4" man, getting changed in changing rooms in the same facilities, even before you talk about the actual competition element and how unfair it is on those girls. Um, Again, how I mean, what drove you, if you like, to go to Atlanta and to shout, "He's a man"? What was the burning thing inside you to really make, if you like, that step forward?
Well, I was invited for a start. I was already going to New York to go and give a talk for somebody's film, a woman called Jennifer Lowell. So I was already in America. And then there were quite an active group in America looking at the sport issue. So I just went along, and I'm a little bit like, if something needs saying, I'm going to say it. It's just the way I'm built. It's probably, it's in my genes, it's in my bones. And I have 4 children. I have 3 sons and a daughter. And my daughter is not quite the same as me. She's not going to tell someone to stop it. And so I felt, oh, I don't know. Sometimes you're just the person, aren't you? And you get served up something that is impossible to ignore. It's I've been to America a few times. I lobbied in America in 2019, because I wanted to go and do a little protest outside of Twitter, and someone said, "Don't go to San Francisco because you might get killed." So I did a little tour of the US back in 2019, again in 2022. So then going in 2023 was just, I feel very at home in America. I do love the place. Um, and so that was it. And just when you're in that position of knowing that everyone else is not going to say anything, like they really aren't going to say anything, even sort of other women who are activists, that they're not going to say it, and it's you or it's no one. Quite simply, it's always going to be me. I'm always going to say it. I'm always going to be that person that doesn't. I don't walk by if somebody's like screaming at a small child, for example. I'm just. My husband thinks that I'm lucky not to have been punched, but not by him, obviously, by some random stranger. When I decide that I am like the matriarch of the world, and everyone should do as they're told. So yeah, it's just the way I am. And going is I always think everything I've ever done in this space is going to be that one thing that changes everything, and everyone goes, "Oh, of course it's nonsense." Yes, I agree. So I guess it was just another one of those times.
Do you feel like a shift change since the Supreme Court ruling in the UK? Is that something you feel or see?
Yes and no. I think words have changed. I don't think actions have. I mean, whilst we've still got men dressing as women going in and teaching children in schools, I don't think I want to claim too much victory. Whilst we've still got doctors and nurses in the NHS, willing to mutilate vulnerable people and slice off their breasts, and I don't mean children, I mean like 18-year-olds, or going to work pretending to be the opposite sex and everyone else around them having to shut up. Whilst we've got the Gender Recognition Act, whilst that's operational, whilst we have the Equality Act, which I also think is rubbish, and whilst we're part of the European Human Rights Convention, I don't know that we can think of victory. And at the same time, we've also got Labour. So we've got a government that, after listening to the Women and Equalities Committee the other day, we've got a government that I think may try a different route, to try and please everyone all at the same time, particularly the rabid activists who pretend they think that men can be women.
I definitely want to talk about your experience with the trans activists, but before we go into it, I want to talk about the Gender Recognition Act because that's something that I was reading before the show in terms of that's something that you've campaigned against for some time. For people who are unaware of what that act means, if you could explain it that'd be amazing, and also why you are so against the act.
Okay. So what we have in law with the Gender Recognition Act is A, the use of the word gender, which is an undefinable concept of what it actually means. And what it used to mean, what we all thought it meant maybe, was another word for sex for people that maybe don't want to use the word sex. And then what they've stretched it to mean is the idea of what you might feel like in your head. Well, that's unknown. You can't feel like a woman if you're not a woman. Um, and what that did in law in 2004 is it basically said that you could lie about who you are and force everybody around you to lie, and it would be the foundation upon women being now arrested for calling a man, or you having some sort of difficulty at work about referring to a man as a man. And embedded in that particular law, not only are you allowed to change all your sort of legal documentation to say that you're something that you're not, and force other people to do it, you also have a clause that it's kind of illegal to tell someone that someone is the opposite sex. So if I was working somewhere and obviously the Supreme Court is doing something about this, but let's say I'm working somewhere and there's a coffee morning and really only the women go, and they talk about, I don't know, the menopause. It's a nice little how angry are we today with the menopause group. A man could go along to that, and if I said to the lady next to me, he's a man, then I have breached some sort of clause in the Gender Recognition Act. Now, what the Gender Recognition Act also informs is something called gender identity, which again is not explained. It's total nonsense. It's just totally undefined anywhere in law. Nobody really can tell you what it is. If I tried to describe it to you, it could mean a million different things and none. And that also it has gender identity in the Equality Act, and the police have it as a special characteristic, like a protected characteristic. So from the 2004 Gender Recognition Act, where it gives somebody a certificate to say that they are the opposite sex, bearing in mind gender, and then it says they're the opposite sex. So even that doesn't make any sense. We now have all the difficulty that most of us have been hitting up against since we've heard about it. So sort of since many of us since 2015, it really got going. So the Equality Act in 2010, probably the 2004 Act, Gender Recognition Act didn't change too much. But in 2010, you started seeing councils and everybody trying to adhere to the Equality Act, which they all pretty much got wrong. And those policies started really happening in about 2013, 2014. And that's when also the Equality Act really messed up things like an elderly woman can't ask for female-only care when the council provide care. So the council started having like equal employment policies for men or women when it came to intimate care of women. So that isn't even men in dresses. That's just regular men. I don't know a single elderly woman who would choose a man over a woman to come in her house and give her like intimate or any care whatsoever.
Crazy. The whole time when you were explaining the Gender Recognition Act, I just kept thinking, what's the need for it? What is why have people done this? Is it just purely for people who want that self-identification? Is that literally just targeted towards them?
Well, so the reason behind it is the human right under the European Convention of Human Rights, the human right to a private life and a family life. So initially, it's because you couldn't get married. And they would say that as a human being in this country, you have a right to get married. And you couldn't get married if you pretended to be a woman, but you weren't a woman, because then it would be a gay marriage. And so gay marriage wasn't legal. Well, now it is. And we also have other ways of partnering that are legally sound. So there's no real need for it. But obviously, once you have that certificate and you can say to people, you can't ask, and like you can't even ask also whether or not somebody has a certificate. It's a very weird thing.
Oh,
So you
right.
can't say to someone, do you have a gender recognition certificate? Because like in an employment situation, though maybe again, we may have changed that, but I doubt it. You can't ask them what their status is.
So am I right in thinking, you're in a company, you own a business, and if you have different genders, you can't essentially make policies or anything for, let's say, we need to expand the amount of women toilets because there are 15 women in our workforce and they have all said that they're women. That's wouldn't be the case. You just got to basically, what do you do in that circumstance?
Well, what should always have been the case, and I think we have to be really careful, whilst I'm going to talk about the post sort of Supreme Court world, it has always been the case. The Supreme Court simply said yes to what what we already knew. It didn't say, right, we are now going to say that these men aren't women. It has always been the case, and bad actors and the EHRC were just weak, cowardly, and submitted to the whim and the will of people who wanted policies to pretend that men can be women and women can be men. And if I can just add, nobody cares about women who want to be men. They're just a convenient little tool for the men to use. Nobody's threatened by a woman with a wispy beard because often they're about 5'2", and they're no threat to anybody but themselves. Often, although I don't think women should take testosterone. It's really, really bad for us, and I think it probably makes them quite aggressive. But that said, you should never have allowed a man in your employment to use women-only spaces. You should never have done that. There is a law. It's the Health and Safety Executive on single-sex provision of toilet and washing facilities. Now, what it means is if you have toilets, they're either mixed sex, in which case they need to be fully enclosed, floor to ceiling, lockable, with a sink, a toilet, and a way to dry your hands inside that space. If you don't have that, then it needs to be single sex, and then it has to be single sex, meaning only women that are actually women are allowed in that space, or only men that are actually men. So that's what you should provide in any employment or service space or school above the age of 8. So that's what should be provided, unless it's really properly enclosed. So you can't even have all three. You can't say to someone, right, okay, which is why a toilet with disabled access is fully enclosed and lockable. So that's why that can be, either sex can use it. But I think it's really important that if you're going in a publicly owned building, like a council building, if they sort of say, oh, we've got women's, we've got men's, we've got gender neutral, that supposed gender neutral, which I would call mixed sex, has to be fully enclosed.
Right. Again, it would be interesting to get your take on it, but I don't know many people, if not any people, who would prefer to use a mixed gender toilet. I don't know any men that prefer it. I don't definitely don't know any women that prefer it. I think it's quite absurd. It's obviously very popular and becoming quite, well, it has become quite a big thing in London in particular, where you see a lot of these toilets. But anyone that I've spoken to, anytime I've used it, male wise, it's awkward, it's weird, it just doesn't, you feel uncomfortable. And that's on the male side. I can't imagine what it must feel for the woman side. So it's a really bizarre
Mm.
trend, if you like. What are some of the other things that you've seen from these last 10 years? Because you've been aware of this for such a long time, what are some of the things that maybe the average person doesn't quite see or doesn't quite understand how big an issue this is and why you are so vocal about it? What are some of the things that many of our listeners and viewers will maybe not be fully aware of in the last 10 years?
I would say one of the biggest issues, if you're a parent, is teachers that lie and are dishonest and conceal what it is they're telling your children. So I would ask any parent watching, have a look at the policies, especially post um, the Supreme Court clarification. Have a look at what your children are being taught in school, and have a look at their toilets. But I went along to a meeting with a mother who had two autistic daughters in a primary school. One autistic daughter, one not autistic, 7 and 9 years old. And what they're doing in schools is they often partner with an organization like No Outsiders or the Rainbow Project or Educate and Celebrate. They're sort of different lobby groups. The school pays them hundreds of pounds, and then they have this sort of partnership, and it's all sort of dressed up as inclusion, right? And so they will include a little bit of, a kid in a wheelchair, or somebody with two mums, or somebody with bereavement, or all of these things. But really what they're pushing is LGBT. And I will include LGB. And I know often it's not very fashionable to do that, but in primary school, I don't really think there's any need whatsoever to talk about sexuality. I do think there's a need that, like by osmosis, if a kid started school and they had two mums, and that was a source of kind of bullying or anything, I think it'd be a really good lesson for a whole class to talk about that, and to make it normal and to address it. Like you don't want any child coming to school feeling like their family is somehow defective. But also, I don't think we need to be talking to children about sexuality in any shape or form. In fact, I don't really know. Like I've heard the argument that you should talk to children about certain things like body parts and so on because it can highlight abuse, and I really do doubt that claim. I don't think it's true. So anyway, so I go into this school meeting, and they are a no outsider school. So as soon as you walk into this primary school, oh my God, there's pride flags everywhere. It's all like proud, diverse, we include, blah blah blah. It's all like, oh, isn't that so lovely? And it's kind, and on the face of it, if you're not naive, it's probably quite a nice thing. But then you have a look at the books, and it's things like My Brother George, and it's a little boy whose brother, still at primary school, but whose brother is now a girl. A little bit different. Now he's a girl, and how it would be so terrible to say anything about it. Or there's a story called Red the Crayon, which is the story we discussed in the meeting. Those teachers barefaced lied to that woman, and they said, oh, this isn't about gender identity, and they went on, and they were really careful not to use the words boy and girl, but we all knew what they were talking about. It was a blue crayon, and it's got a red wrapper, and it was all about how the crayon behaves and how the crayon really wants to behave, because inside it's blue and on the outside it's pink or whatever. And so I just say, how did that book get into the school? And they said, and these were safeguarding leads, and they said it got into the school with this No Outsiders program. So we knew. I think I basically called them liars because they knew it was about gender identity. In addition to that, the 7-year-old would be in trouble if she's called a boy who said he was a girl in that school. That would be like any other bullying. That would be like calling a kid fat every day. And if they went on a residential trip, a boy would be included, or may well be included, in the girls' resident kind of bedroom, and the parents wouldn't necessarily be told. So
Wow.
this is what's happening in all these schools. You've got cross-dressing men who are girl guide leaders who go away with the girl guides and the brownies, and you've got the same, because the Scouts have never had any scandals about sexual abuse. You've got the same as cross-dressing men who are kind of leading scout groups. Like these men have infiltrated everywhere, and nobody's supposed to say anything. You're not supposed to admit that that you think they're perverts. You're not supposed to do any of that. So I think that's the biggest thing for me is school. And then obviously we've got the NHS, and we've got the police, and we've got all these places where you'd expect such a dodgy ideology not to really impact. And it really is everywhere, including House of Parliament, House of Lords. You've got bloody staff members wearing rainbow lanyards in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And in our courts, you've got them wearing rainbow lanyards. So the whole country is captured.
You can add sport, like you can add Harry Kane. England had to wear the rainbow captain armband, and it's everywhere. I just want to clarify, Kelly, the school thing you were talking about, is that something current, like as in what goes on day to day now?
Yeah, that's
Wow.
now.
Wow.
I mean, it was a couple of years ago, but schools are not changing their policies. Not that I've seen. I mean, it's worth everybody writing to their schools. But no, because they think they're right. These teachers have been trained. There's a school called it's in Sussex. I tweeted about it yesterday. There's a school and it's having this whole pride celebration. And then they're also a teacher training school. So I think what happens now with teacher training is often they lock into a school. I think it's a funding stream, to be honest, and I think it's
Right.
probably terrible. But they lock into a school, and now that's a teacher training school as well, or partnership, because many of these trusts do that, and they are promoting pride. So you know that the teachers are promoting it because they've all been trained to promote it. So, and they think what's really frightening is they genuinely think they're doing right.
Yeah.
So these teachers with these terrible bigoted parents who wouldn't accept their child and their child would end up committing suicide and all these other lies told to these teachers think that they know how to parent your child better than you do, which is why they don't feel that they owe you anything. They don't owe you telling you. They think that they're doing the right thing and protecting this child from something because unbeknownst to those teachers, they are in a cult.
I couldn't agree more. And I honestly think I used to have a lot of sympathy for teachers because I felt like the teacher's role has changed, in that teachers now are not just teachers, and they're taking the role of parents in some circumstances. And some I actually have some sympathy for because I think some kids have been let down by their parents and they need help. But I think some there is another element where they're actually just deliberately trying to take control of these circumstances and they deliberately are enjoying taking on that extra responsibility of being a parent but not actually being a parent, which is absolutely absurd and really really deeply worrying. So at the moment, you'd say to parents listening to this, you should actually check what your child's being taught on stuff like this. Like, how would they know this? Like, what is it taught in? I'm trying to think of the class, like critical study. Like, where would they get this sort of?
No, that's quite easy. You can have a look on their website and you can see whether or not they're partnering with anyone. So no outside of school will have it all over the website. You'll be in no doubt. And you might have to have a look at their diversity and inclusion policy or their equality policies. You can have a look also in the bullying policy because sometimes it's hidden in there, which is how they get away with it and teaching it in PSHE because they'll say it's part of bullying as opposed to like an ideology. But you can just ask the question to those teachers, and I would say this. I would say, and this is terribly sexist, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you're a man, you do the asking. If you're a man, you make the phone call. You talk to the school, and I don't want this to be true, and it shouldn't be true, but it is. That you will get taken more seriously than if your wife does it. I don't know what difference it makes. Obviously, something happens when those words leave a woman's vocal cords, they get tangled up into some sort of whiny mess. And that's all teachers hear is just, oh, woman moan. And when a man does it, for some reason, it's taken really seriously. So I would implore men to do it. And maybe men use different language. Maybe women would sort of tentatively say, oh, I'm interested. Whereas maybe a man just says, what are you teaching my kid?
I think,
But
well,
men
yeah.
do it.
I mean, there are things that men are generally more, they're less agreeable than women. But do you think also, Kelly, it could be the fact that a lot of the teachers are women, and so and they've taken on almost this motherly role with this child, and then here comes the actual real mum trying to tell the fake mum what to do, and maybe there's a bit of a conflict, whereas the man is the father in this. So do you think that that could be a reason as well in terms of this teacher who's basically taking on a role as mum and now
I
other mum?
definitely think you've hit on something that probably I haven't considered, that actually a lot of the teachers are women. So maybe that does make a difference. I mean, if you look at primary education, a lot of teachers are women. A lot of senior management happen to be men. I think men still get promoted quicker than women. That might be for all sorts of reasons. We can talk about like maternity and women taking time off and all of that. But it still is true that men seem to shoot up the to be promoted quicker, or it certainly was the case the last time I looked. So I don't want to misrepresent anyone, but there is a there is a funny thing, I think, in primary school as well. When you're dealing with small people all the time, you forget what adults are. Like, I've been spoken to by a deputy head teacher of a primary school as if I was a child, and I had to remind him very sharply that he was talking to a, like, I think I was about a 45-year-old woman at the time, maybe a 40-year-old woman at the time. But I had to remind him very clearly that he was talking to an adult. So maybe there is some of that happens if you spend all your day with kids. Uh, Maybe your idea of sort of the whole way of things is a little bit different. But
Oh yeah,
whatever it is, it works.
well, maybe so, and I think that's where they have that almost, I don't want to say too much sympathy for a child, but like they don't understand a child is actually still a child, and until they're not fully developed, and maybe they give them too much credit for the fact that it is just a child. But I think a lot of it'll be interesting to see your take as you've got kids, and so it'll be interesting to see how your views on this. But from what I've noticed, a lot of primary school teachers are young women typically, and often now we're seeing maybe more my generation of people and younger not having children. So in some ways, they're not actually that they don't actually have children themselves, and they're
No.
now taking these control of these children that in more matters than just teaching, and I just think that's so bad overall society. I get in extreme circumstances when parents are not there, and unfortunately teachers have to almost take this unfair burden, but I do think in a lot of circumstances they're deliberately taking on this extra responsibility, and
Mm.
they're almost trying to ostracize people like you, actual real mums. Is that fair to say?
Yes. So there's a amazing woman called Sarah Jane Blakemore who talks about development, human development, and your adolescent phase often ends when you become a parent, or when you become responsible. So if you're a business owner and you're employing people and you've got responsibilities, then you may leave your adolescent phase without having children. But often it is when you have children. So I'm just thinking, as you're talking there, right? So you've got young women who are often compliant because the social anxiety of not fitting in is pretty great. So they're teenagers, then they go into teaching at 18. So they train to be teachers. By the time they're 21, 22, they're back in school, having never really gone into the real world because they've just gone into uni. And they're back in school with small children again, not having children of their own, probably can't afford a house on a teacher's income. Um, are they still adolescents? I mean, maybe there's an argument to say that they really don't get out of that particular stage of development. And so then they're still sort of kind of like student activists where they think they're healing the world one child at a time.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah. I've never even thought of it like that, but that um, definitely makes sense. You know, and as we're sort of just talking about schools and kind of closing on education, um, what would you like to see happen next in education? Because we've had the Supreme Court ruling. We had Helen Joyce on this podcast days after the Supreme Court ruling, and she said that the ruling now needs to be acted by schools, and that's the new challenge. Like schools need to actually acknowledge this and move forward. Otherwise, they have a real battle going forward where they're going to have to essentially write to every school or campaign to every single school. What needs to happen now for because it just seems from what you've said, like you've got teachers engulfed in this ideology, this cult-like ideology. You've got outside influences who are engaged in this. How do you reverse all of this, or how do you get rid of it?
Well, I think we somebody has to sue the teachers unions because I think they're horrendous, horrendous, horrendous. In many ways, but certainly in this aspect. Um, for me, you get rid of all teachers that think they can cross dress and go to work. Like they're just tomorrow they need to be got rid of. And we're already in a very tricky situation with schools. So how practical that is, I don't know. And the tricky situation with schools is children's behavior has been horrendous, terrible and declining rapidly for many, many years. Whatever we've been doing, it's wrong. Now, that
Yeah.
might be the fact that children aren't told no at school. Nobody's allowed to get upset. Nobody's allowed to shout at any children. We're not really allowed to discipline them. And bearing in mind that Eton isn't doing that. Like, Eton's not having no discipline. The schools where the elite kids go,
Yeah.
they're disciplined. But these, like, maybe it's permissive teachers, maybe it's because we're living too much of a luxurious society, but whatever it is, kids aren't expected to behave. They have all of these rights because we got it so wrong before where they had no rights. And people were getting away with abusing children. They weren't even being listened to or believed. And then we flipped it. So now I think we are not setting up children with a chance of success in life at all. So you've already got that going on. And then add into that mix teachers that are trying to please children and be their mates and be kind of, yeah, let's listen to the kids all the time. Well, how about just teach them?
Yeah.
How about the way that we can do all of this is by saying, let's make sure they understand maths better than Chinese children. Like, let's look across the world and go, do you know what they're doing really like Chinese teachers. My parents used to live in China for about 10 years, but Chinese teachers will throw books at children. Now, I don't say that's a good thing, but those children have better English than many of our own children. So something works. I don't know if actual violence is the way forward, but they've certainly got discipline and respect, and we've lost all of that. So you get rid of AGP teachers, autogynephile teachers, so men dressing as women with fake breasts. You get rid of all of those. You make it completely unlawful to teach this ideology. In fact, any ideology. I'd like to see a bit of a return to maybe religious studies where ideas and beliefs can be discussed in a belief kind of setting. I don't think this would be one of them. Social media beliefs aren't worthy of discussion. We don't advocate for anorexia, so I don't know why we'd start talking about breast binders with children. We just eke it all out, and we have a focus on our education system that if they come out well qualified and able to learn, that is better than them understanding whether or not they've got a gender identity, which I don't think anybody does. But that seemed to be this. It's a very weird focus. It's almost like the school system knows that it's so shockingly bad
Yeah.
that it wants to achieve something, and maybe that is completely corrupting, socially corrupting children. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening. I don't have children, but definitely want to have children one day, and it just absolutely frightens me to hear what's going on. I joke with my wife, I hope by the time we have it, like this stuff will just be, it will be old news, and it will just be like it will be a thing in the past, and we'll look back and think how crazy was that phase. But I've got nieces and nephews, and I do think like it's so scary what they're being taught at school. I never had to think of anything of anything like this. You're just taught to, like you say, to learn basic skills of life. Not you're a child. You have identity issues. You have that as a child. It's perfectly normal. But then to have teachers and outside groups put this further into your head, I can't imagine how confusing that must be for a kid. You're already confused as a kid.
And they do this mental health thing. It's so insane. They consistently ask children about their mental health. I mean, I didn't know the word depressed, stressed, anxious, mental health. That was not in my vocabulary as I maybe knew if my mum was angry or sad, but we didn't use these other words. And I remember when my son was about 10, 11, he was going up to secondary school, and he came home one day and he said, I'm really anxious that I'm going to lose, I'm not going to be able to find the classroom. And I was like, well, you'll be walking with loads of other people, and everyone will be expected to lose the class, like lose their place in their secondary school, not know where the next class is. That's really common, happens to everyone. It's no big deal. I was like, but where's this word anxious come from? And they did this whole thing about what might make you anxious at secondary school. And I said, well, probably bloody talking about it will make you anxious at secondary
100%.
school.
100%, and you can see it now, and like even like there's examples I was reading a few weeks ago about how kids can take time off if they have climate anxiety. So if they're worried about the climate and you're in primary school, you can say to your teacher, I'm really anxious about what's going on, and you can take time off. Like there's been examples of kids doing this, and it's just absolutely crazy that one, it's really worrying that you're so anxious about something, and two, if I was that kid at that age, I definitely would have made that up and said I had it to take time off school. And but the other side is there's actually genuine kids who are have climate anxiety and they're using that to get. It's a really scary time for children. These children are going to one day be the workers of the UK. They're the ones that are going to be, you know, building our economy. And if they can't absorb any kind of stress, then that is really, really worrying.
Yeah, and also it doesn't make sense. So at the same time, a school is allowing children to take, they're like mental health, mental health, mental health, and all the kids have got phones in their bags, and they're all using their phones in their lessons, and they're allowed their phones in at break time and lunchtime. And then the school, what, appease their own conscience by saying, oh, let's talk about mental health? Well, if they really meant any of that, they'd have discipline in the schools and they'd allow children from 9 until 3 to feel safe. And
Yeah.
that, and I don't mean safe like they're not going to get offended. I mean that they're not going to get a kicking from one class to the next, or they're not going to feel bullied or ostracized. Um, and again, bullied as in bullied, not somebody saying, I don't like your Pride Progress flag. Like just it seems like the things we're allowed to talk about are nonsensical and don't solve anything. And the things that we're not allowed to talk about and the things that we need to talk about are actually destroying the lives of the children in this country.
I want to talk more about the things that we can't talk about because you alluded to it earlier about your Twitter ban. You had it for a sustained period of time. Some people won't be aware of why you got banned, how you got banned. I understand it's in relation to mermaids, or is that a different
As a
case?
police. And that so I'll try and make it short because it's very long. So I tweeted 6 tweets. I got into. I was the first person, as I believe I was the first person to be interviewed by the police for tweets about child anything to do with the trans issue. So I tweeted about Susie Green taking her son to Thailand to be castrated because he thought it was a girl on his 16th birthday. I was interviewed under caution. I was alerted in 2017. I was interviewed in 2018. I was interviewed again in 2018 for something else on my YouTube channel. So I've been interviewed by the police on 3 occasions. They've been to my house once because I was untoward about paedophiles, their words, not mine. And I was also arrested for trying to speak in lockdown publicly. So I've had that. But anyway, when I did my billboard, so if people don't know, that I came to prominence, one, because I was interviewed under caution by the police, and that went into the Times. And then later on that year, I put up a billboard in Liverpool with the dictionary definition of the word woman. And I raised the money for that by selling T-shirts and stickers. In fact, that's still how I fund all of my activism is by merch sales. So I was banned from Twitter in September, I think 2018. I didn't get it back till last Christmas. I'm banned from Mumsnet. I'm not allowed to sign a change.org. I'm not monetized on YouTube. I'm not allowed to sell things on Facebook or Instagram. I'm not monetized on Twitter. I get no revenue share.
Even now, this is the case now.
Yeah, no.
Wow. Wow.
I'm not allowed a Patreon account. I recently got debanked, which meant I had to suspend my store in the United States of America because the people that we were banking with, which enables you to be in one place and sell in another, they debanked me after like these weird persistent investigations that kind of overlapped. So it was they would ask me for evidence, I'd provide it, and in the last week of me providing evidence, they'd ask me for evidence, I'd provide it, and it was just ongoing for about 4 months, and then they debanked me. Yeah, I'm banned from loads of places. I can't sell on Teespring. There's the largest sticker printer in Europe printed my stickers for 4 years, and then obviously somebody complained, and then they stopped producing my stickers. So yeah, I'm banned from many places, and it's always for the same thing. It's because I simply won't bend a single tiny morsel to this ideology.
What was the big one? Because from reading your profile earlier on today, it seemed Twitter definitely was the big one from what I can see. The mermaids, when you sort of that issue. What exactly happened? You just tweeted against the CEO of Mermaids, and that resulted in a ban.
I think I was banned much later, but it was hotting up, and there were more trans activists clearly working in Twitter. And
Right.
so I was shadow banned, and then lots of little things, and then one day, bang, it was gone. But I didn't use she for men, and I did call them men. Um, and so Twitter just went kaput one day, which is what's really irritating about it is I think I've got about 160, 170,000 followers, but there are people who basically share my stuff and capitalize. So from 2018 to 2022, I think that's when um, this this whole thing became kind of notable people. So I still did pretty well of being able to continue my activism because I went then to the real world. So then I started going to actual speakers corner rather than relying on the town square online. I went actually back into the town square. So it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But I just think I wonder how many followers and what sort of impact I could be making had I not been prevented at every turn from actually saying things publicly. And I have been so badly cancelled. I just think the limit on my exposure has probably been greater than I could possibly imagine, considering there's plenty of men that said similar stuff that never got any suspension whatsoever.
There definitely is a thing where I feel like the trans activists really go after women, like way worse than they do with men. But I want to touch on the thing you said about how many people since have after maybe capitalized or have just like grown. Do you think it's because there's a saying, it's gone from my head, but there is a saying about being the first, and often the person who goes first is the one who has to deal with the brunt with the awfulness, and essentially the ones after are the ones who can basically not take advantage, but the ones that will get the credit for. There's a couple of people who come to mind. You come to mind. Graham Linhan, the writer for Father Ted, comes to mind, where his career has basically just been completely finished. Whereas lots of other actors and lots of other people in that industry now are coming out and saying that they're being more advocates of it. Like your Mel Gibson's high profile people are also saying stuff like this, but the first ones who did this quite early on, maybe pre 20, like you said, 2018, those ones have very few of them have been able to carry on their careers without serious repercussions. Do you think that's one of the reasons why?
Yeah, I do. I mean, again, I hate to be immodest, but I did shift the Overton window. I did. I know I did. I just said it. I was the first person to say it on TV. I just said, I just don't believe they're women. On the Sky News, and I was also up against India Willoughby, and then I was never invited back on This Morning. Um, but yeah, I think the pioneers die and the settlers settle, right? Um, I don't even think that is the expression, but I'd love to know what it is because somebody said it to me the other day. But I think um, I'm still not where we need to be. And women that have come after me, they want to accommodate these men, and they're more about human rights of everyone, and I'm not. I'm a women's rights campaigner. I'm not interested in the human rights of men that want to come into my space. I don't really care what happens to him at all. He just needs to stay out. I don't want it to be my business. He shouldn't make it my business. He needs to stay out of spaces where my daughter might be,
Yeah.
or anyone's daughter for that matter. So uh, we'll see how far this goes. But yeah, definitely, I definitely had the scythe and I cleared the jungle path, and I have a few cuts and bruises along the way, and then I make that path clear for other people to walk.
Well, talking of your next ventures and now pushing forward, you have the Party of Women. It'd be great to understand more about that.
So it started as a single issue party, and the single issue was this whole sort of no woman has a penis, no man has a vagina, non-binary is nonsense, and transitioning children is profound abuse, which is what I sort of say at the beginning of every one of my Let Women Speaks when I go to Speakers Corner the last Sunday of every month. Um, and it was single issue. And that was the point of it. The point of it was to stand for election so we could go and have conversations in places where maybe those conversations weren't being had. It was just to open another avenue where, in a space where nobody wanted to say these things, that candidates would say it. And we had like 16 candidates in the election. They all did very, very well for a brand new party. I think it was respectable. But what the more important thing is, we did get to say those words in those spaces, sat next to sort of now sitting MPs, number one. And we also got to, the Royal Mail will post leaflets through every single constituent's door. So that was, when I stood in Bristol, which was, a decision because I knew I'd be standing against like Thangam Debonair and Carla Denyer. So that was a purposeful decision to be in a conversation with those particular individuals. When I did that, every single person in that constituency got a little leaflet that said those words, those unsayable words. So it was brilliant. We've now branched out because I feel the topics for women we can't ignore. I've recently started talking about the veil, and because I've seen it more and more in London. We can't ignore that. We can't ignore women's rights because they are across cultures. So I talk about women's rights across cultures because I feel that a woman has a human right to full rights. It doesn't matter what the color of her skin is, what culture she comes from. I believe she is entitled, particularly in the United Kingdom, globally, to be afforded the same rights as me.
And that would be incorporated in Party of Women. That would be part of the whole.
Yep.
Amazing, amazing. Well, it sounds like you've got exciting new plans coming ahead. How do people find out more about Party of Women? Is there like a website or
Yes.
anything?
So you can go to partyofwomen.org. You can follow me on Twitter. I tweet about it. But we have a Matrafest on there. Manifesto. I think I might just call it a manifesto. But we have one just to talk about all of this sort of stuff and in more detail, because I think I want to be a party of principles. I'm not going to be making policies. I'm not going to be elected. I should be elected. It's never going to happen. So I want to be a party of principles so that, again, we offer a place where we can just stretch that Overton window. So people go, oh, have you heard about that party? They've got this policy, or they've got this kind of principle, and then people can talk about it.
Amazing. It's been amazing speaking to you, Kelly. We have like a closing ritual on the show where I ask you for a unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular. It can be anything we discussed on the show, or it could be something completely random. But yeah, what's an unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular?
I think as many women as possible who want to stay home with their children should stay home with their children. I think that we are in a very horrible, horrible place in this country where women are encouraged by successive governments to return to work as quickly as possible when they don't want to do jobs that they don't really like because they are not going to be supported to stay home. So I would say to women, have children, don't wait. It's never going to be a great time to have children. It's always going to massively disrupt, but it is the most wonderful disruption ever. Being a mother is I think the joy of my life, and heartache, but the joy of my life. So have those babies, don't wait. And if you don't love your job so much, please consider staying home for as long as possible. I promise you won't regret it.
It's interesting you say the having kids, because that has been a reoccurring theme. We've had so many people say the exact same thing, because it's clearly an issue in the West in general, not enough kids. But I'm really interested to elaborate on the stay at home at mums, because I was listening to something a few days ago where it was the husband was talking, and he was saying how his wife met one of her former colleagues, and the former colleague was asking, "What do you do now?" Like, as in, you know, you used to work. I think it was Google or something. And she goes, "Oh, I'm just a mum now." And the husband afterwards was like, "Wow, like, why did you just say just?" And she was like, "I don't know, like, I'm actually really happy being a mum, like that's what I want to do, but I just feel like I can't say, I'm almost embarrassed to say it amongst friends and peers that that's my what I'm doing full time at the moment. So the way to do it is just by saying just, or like, oh, I'm just like, you know, it's a casual thing, and you're almost embarrassed, if that's probably the better word. So it's really fascinating for to hear that
I
perspective.
think there's a flip, right? I think there's a flip because and maybe this is just personal. Maybe I'm going to admit something that I probably shouldn't. But I actually think when you have children and you stay home, you actually think that you've got the best deal, that you're doing the most wonderful thing, and you don't want to tell anyone just in case they feel bad. And I like somebody said that I was in a discussion the other day where somebody said about patronizing women, that, you know, when women are obnoxious and they say, oh, having children is the greatest privilege. And I just replied, I was like, I think you should unpack why you think it's obnoxious for someone who is a mother to say that it's really important to them. Because it is the most life affirming thing that most women will ever do, even if it's really difficult. But the love you have for your children is indescribable and incomparable. And it just adds something to your soul. I don't even believe in souls, but it kind of, maybe it gave me a soul. You never know. But it adds something to your life and gives you purpose beyond anything else. And I mean, by a country mile. And I had a really good job. I was very successful before I had my babies. And I thought I'd go back to work. And one, my children are all close together. So I had 4 children by the time the oldest was 6. And the first 2 were just over a year apart. But also, as soon as I saw that little baby, I just thought, I can't imagine going back to work. I can't imagine a day where I'd think, well, you know, I'd rather not see him all day. So yeah, and also have them young. Like, even if you've got a massive mortgage, um, move somewhere cheaper, and have them young. And then you can have a romance when they've all left home. You can continue your romance with your husband.
Do you think, Kelly, it's because I've been having this debate recently with a few people, and do you think it's because maybe you see maybe children as a gift, and I think there is a maybe changing, particularly maybe my generation, who see children more as a burden? Do you think that's maybe a reason why people are having less kids?
Maybe, look, I'm very lucky. My husband and I both come from working class families, and he managed to get himself a job where he's well paid. And I don't mean like crazy well paid. I just mean we were still comfortable and I could stay home.
Yeah.
And so I know that is like the change in my lifetime is that like my mum didn't stay home. My mum and dad both worked. But then I had my granny because my granny was a little bit older, so I probably stayed with my granny a bit. But um, I think we just moved into this two wage. We're just used to having stuff. Like I didn't have I'm going to sound like 105 now, but we didn't have a phone, we didn't have a car, we didn't have a TV, we didn't have a washing machine, we didn't even have a freezer. Um, and we probably didn't have carpets in every room. But now, sort of your outgoings are astronomical, and house prices are really expensive. So I think there's all those considerations all the time. And also, we live in very nuclear families, and we move away from our families, so we don't have familial support. Um, you know, other cultures probably do have that much better, although that also comes with really, really interfering in-laws. So swings and roundabouts. But but what we're doing is we're not doing right by our children. And we're, in one way, we don't put them first because we don't want them, and we're not really considering as a society what we can do for our children. And then the other way, we've got the government taking our children as soon as they possibly can. And the two things combined are really, really bad. Um, so I don't know what the answer is, but I think Hungary's doing some great things where you get more tax breaks. We also had a thing, and I'm sorry to go on, but we also had something that happened where women got independent tax in their household. And I've seen feminists celebrate this. And the truth of it is, so used to be taxed on your household incomes. It was like a married man tax allowance or something. And they made it independent. And so what happened is everyone paid that little bit more on tax. And it meant that poor women always worked, but those middle women, the women like my friends' mums who were stay-at-home mums, they could no longer afford to stay home because their husband's tax was just a little bit more. That meant she couldn't afford to stay home. So all of those middle income women, like in like 3 bedroom, semi-detached houses that like had a kitchen diner and a nice reception room in the front and a front garden and a back garden in little towns, they could no longer stay home anymore. And I think we didn't used to have daycare. Anybody I knew was rich enough, had a nanny, and if they didn't have a nanny, they went home to a sort of a house with no one in it. But that wasn't primary age children. So it just shifted very much to make these women go to work and to do what? To very low paid jobs that they don't like. Like, how ridiculous is that for a society?
Will some of this stuff be part of Party of Women? Because we've had this discussion with a few people on here, women on here, who have said very similar things to you, where they're not saying that every woman should stay at home, but what they're saying is like that shouldn't be frowned upon. We should, just like we say that women should have careers and they the ones that want to be corporates and go for it kind of thing. But at the same time, those women who want to stay at home and want to be with kids, they should be encouraged and they shouldn't actually be looked down. Is that similar? Would this stuff be part of your party
Yes,
manifesto?
we do have a policy on looking at trying to resolve this because it's gone so far now that if you don't both work and continue to both work, you can't afford it. And it's the same thing as everything in this country. Like if you do nothing, then you get everything. So if neither of you work, and like there's a big housing estate not very far from me. You've got a family living next door to each other, 2 low-wage full-time workers who have to put their kids into day like breakfast club, after school club, holiday club. They have to do all that. They don't really get a holiday, and then right next door to them is a family that don't work and don't really do anything and live a purpose-free life, which I would imagine is terribly unhappy. But they're living side by side. So it's how we put this back together is going to take a genius government. I think it does have to start with tax. But we did this thing, didn't we, where it's like, oh, a family can be anyone. Well, no, a family is a family. Let's just make it a family, shall we? Or a mother can be anyone. No, let's just say a mother is the person that has the egg and gives birth to the baby. And we have adopted mothers, and that's wonderful, and that's best of a bad situation. But no, not everyone's a mother. Not everything's a family. Not everything's best for children. Not just let's be honest and go back to a time where we say that children are genuinely important and those formative years shape a society 50 years later.
Yeah.
But let's give them the best formative years we possibly can, where they're secure. And then I think what happens, I know I'm going on, so I'm sorry. Also, I think what happens if you don't spend those really good times with those children in their formative years, you pay for it when they're teenagers, and then you start being permissive. You start giving them everything they want because you don't think that you've got that foundation of bonding that means that you can discipline them and properly parent your children. So it's all of it is just going back to this thing. It's not just about population. It's genuinely about what do you want from this life? And children for me was, I mean, it was a no-brainer. I think I met my husband within 2 weeks. We were talking about we would be together forever and have 4 kids. Well, maybe I was just saying it. I don't know what he was saying. That was my goal.
Well, that's a really nice way to end the episode. Thank you so much for your time, Kelly.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to meet you finally.
Likewise, likewise.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you, thank you.
Cheers. Do I have to keep this on?